Cool, hi. People are just joining, so I'm going to kind of use the silence to talk about nonsense for a couple of minutes. Don't have a guitar or anything like that, so just me and my voice, I'm afraid. People are joining, and thanks for everyone signing up. Lots of sign-ups today, so that's good. Hopefully we can get a good number. And I don't know if any of you were at the last one, but we had a lot of fun at the last one where we got into a bit of a debate about, what was the last one about? I shouldn't have forgotten the topic by now, should I? But I have, unfortunately. But tonight's focus is on cloud platforms, cloud engineering. So that's a really great opportunity to talk around that and think about how we can, as engineers, as engineering leaders, utilize the cloud better in the context of a full stack development exercise. So welcome, yes, welcome to everybody, and we will get started. So we're Full Stack Yorkshire Meetup Group. We're a community. We share and enjoy each other's company. We're not actually together at the moment, but please do use the chat to ask questions, to talk, to share some of your experiences, give some of your comments. That'd be really good, just so we can totally interact with each other as a community would. And then we'd look forward to being able to meet up in person at some point. So tonight, what we're going to do is, first of all, Gwen's going to do a lightning talk for us, talk about some of her experiences. Always lots of great experiences to learn from her, so I really appreciate that. And then we will have a panel discussion where we have some interesting things to talk about. So who are we as a full stack group? Myself, Sean and Kev run this. This is our second meeting, but we want to keep it going to bring us all together as full stack engineers. Do you want to say hi, Sean? Silence is golden. Okay.
All right, hello. So I was trying to find mute and I was trying to respond to a message in Meetup, so apologies about that. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining.
Great. So our panelists are Carl Austin, who's the UK CTO of BJSS, Tanja, who is engineering manager at Sky Betting and Gaming, and Gwen, who is engineering manager at Sonocent, and previously Monzo, and previous to that was Sky, where we worked together. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Gwen.
Oh yeah, brilliant. Let me share my screen. Let's get this show rolling. All right, cool. So, hi there. My name is Gwen Diagram. So, as Rich said, I'm an engineering manager at Sonocent. You can tweet me at Gwen Diagram and feel free to chat away in the thing while I'm talking. So, I wrote and I rewrote a talk about full stack development. So the one that I wrote, it was okay, it was fine, but we don't want fine when we're going to a meetup. We want something exciting to hear. So you've come along to hear some really good stories and learn about some cool stuff. So what I did with the talk that I originally wrote was I threw it in the bin, and instead I decided to tell you one of my favorite stories about project management. So, you know, when you're working on a product and it's an absolute shit show. This is not a new phenomenon. Project shit shows are as old as time. So who here has been to the Vasa Museum in Stockholm? You can pop it in the chat. So it is really wonderful, and it contains one of my favorite stories about project management. And it's named after the famous Vasa ship, which it holds inside of this like massive museum. The Vasa ship, it was built between 1626 and 1628, which was also before we had a really good understanding of mathematics. This came afterwards, which is wild. You kind of think that it was around for ages, but no, it wasn't. So shipbuilders at the time based their designs on feel instead of proven mathematics. And the Vasa was a ship like no other. It was huge. So this huge project was the brainchild of the King of Sweden, who was Gustav Adolf. He requested 4 ships to be built originally. He had these grand plans. So originally he wanted 2 108 keel length ships and 2 135-foot keel length ships. And he wanted these built over a course of 4 years. However, the requirements changed several times from his original idea, as the Swedish lost 10 ships on the 10th of September, 1625. So what happened was the builders had to build 2 new ships and they needed to build them really fast because they'd lost 10. So instead of the 208-foot keel ships, instead the king changed the order to 211-foot ships. And so the construction of a 111-foot ship with a single gun deck began. However, the king heard that the Danish were building a ship and they had 2 gun decks. Therefore, as kings do, he ordered that this ship also had 2 gun decks. And no one in Sweden before had built a ship with 2 gun decks. But I mentioned before, mathematics were just not as advanced in 1626, as the shipbuilders were complete artisans and they worked by feel instead of by drawing out plans. The original 108-foot ship that the king originally asked for, it was just a standard build. They'd already built it before, they knew about it. So when these changes were made, because they already knew about it, no plans for the new features, the extra 3 foot and the extra gun deck, were drawn out. It was just word of mouth. So originally it was a 108-foot keel ship with 1 gun deck. Then it was a 111-foot ship with 1 gun deck, which the builders actually started the construction of. The 111-foot ship had already been started. The keel had been laid. It was totally fine. They were moving on, built the foundations. But then the king changed his mind again. It became a 135-foot ship with 2 gun decks. Since it was scaled up from 111 foot to 135 foot, the ship was a lot narrower than it should have been. And a new keel wasn't built. Instead, they extended the keel of the ship from the 111. Since this was unplanned, the designs were not drawn out at all. Instead, they were felt. Due to the width of the keel, the ship became really unstable due to a high center of gravity, because the keel was not extended widthways, but the top of the ship was. So the ship was kind of like a muffin. Unfortunately, in 1627, the ship's primary designer died a year before the completion of the ship. The plans were undocumented. The specifications of the ship were not documented. And there were some massive communication issues while they were building the ship as well. They had 5 different teams working on the hull, but they didn't communicate with each other at all. And on top of the changing of the ship size, the amount of guns that it was meant to carry changed several times, not just gun decks, but the actual guns as well, which meant that the upper deck had guns that were twice as heavy as the original plan. So this just sounds like a waterfall project with changing requirements that's like kind of hard to implement because it's waterfall, right? Nothing to see here, like, well, actually not quite. This is where the testing comes in and it gets really fun. So this is a waterfall project, right? You gather the requirements, you design it, you build it, you test it, and you ship it. And so the ship has been built to the changing specifications, and now it comes to the time to actually test the ship. Admiral Fleming was basically the product owner, and he ordered these tests to be run. And so what happened was the people that carried out the tests, they carried them out in front of Fleming and the ship's captain as well. And this, because I'm originally a tester, is where it gets really, really interesting. So what they did is they did a lurch test. So how one of these lurch tests runs is you get 30 men and you run them side to side across the ship, and you see if the ship lurches like that. So they repeated it twice, and then it just had to be cut short because the ship was rocking so violently. They thought it would just keel over right there. There wasn't a way to stabilize the ship either, because there was no room for additional ballast because of the really thin keel, because it was they extended the keel from 111 to 135 feet. And adding more weight would have put the second gun portals near or under the waterline as well. The Vasa was carrying around 120 tons of ballast, which is all the rocks that you put in the bottom of the ship. To stabilize the ship, it would have needed twice that. So the bosun, how awful is that word? The bosun, when questioned by Admiral Fleming about the stability, he said, "God grant the ship will stand upright on her keel," which sounds like pure optimism to me, because it ain't gonna happen. And Fleming replied, "The shipbuilder has built ships before, and you should not be worried, except for the fact that he wasn't around anymore, he died." Due to pressure by the king, the ship had to be launched. They didn't have a choice, they had to launch this. And the bosun and the admiral forced themselves into optimism, thinking it was going to be okay, or saying it was going to be okay anyway. Perhaps due to culture, where telling the king the truth could have had dire consequences. But I can't actually tell you for sure the reason for their optimism, because I can study it, but I'm really not a shipbuilder from the 1600s. Anyway, on the 10th of August, 1628, the Vasa set sail on its maiden voyage. After sailing for 20 minutes, a light breeze caused the Vasa to heel over, and 25 minutes after leaving port, the Vasa was on the bottom of Stockholm Harbour. So, how can we solve a problem like the Vasa? My favourite part of the story is the lurch test, where the ship was known to be unstable, but it was ignored to appease the king. Your products will go wrong at time. So the statistics, there's this statistic of 90% of startups failing. And that apparently proves this, although apparently that metric is over 20 years. So let's take it with a pinch of salt. But projects fail, it's fine. And the Vasa, it ended up at the bottom of the sea for 500 years. It was a pretty big failure. So when you see that your product is going to end up at the bottom of the sea, and you see issues as seen on the Vasa, such as poor documentation, poor communication, lack of planning, broken feedback loops, speak up. There's nothing better than getting to work on a successful project, and watching your work set sail and be successful is such a great feeling and achievement, especially when you do it as a awesome team. But also remember, if what you're working on fails, well, the tale's as old as time. Shit's been failing for years. We've been building products for hundreds of years, and some of them are a fantastic success, like the pyramids or the Mayflower, or some of them are more like the Vasa, or what my favorite project from Leeds that I've heard about for years, Spine. But they built Spine 2 out of that. Work to fail early instead of waiting until the end, and fasten that feedback loop. And that's it. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Gwen. Always a lot to take away from a failure story. I wasn't kind of expecting it to be from 500 years ago, though. But certainly, I'm sure there's tons of stuff that we can take away. Great. So let's get on to the panel discussion now, if that's okay, and on to our main theme. Can I just ask you briefly to introduce yourselves? I'll start with Tanja, if that's okay. Just a quick word about who you are, what you do, what excites you generally, or especially within the kind of development space that you're working.
Okay, sure. I'm Tanja Lichtensteiger. I'm engineering manager in Sky Betting and Gaming. I've been in technology for 20 years. My background is software engineering. I started as a software engineer quite young. What excites me at the moment? Well, you know what? For me, I always think about Terminator and self-healing technologies, and I always think about where that's taking us. And I do feel sometimes that what we build is unknowingly getting us slowly into that space, and that is exciting and thrilling and slightly don't press that button type of moment. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Great. Next, Carl, you're kind of technically my boss, so I know I've got to be nice to you this evening. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Carl. I work at BJSS as the UK CTO. I guess my background is all technology. It's anywhere from software engineering, test, operations, worked in architecture, everywhere in the full SDLC in my time, and with quite a wide range of technologies. My specialist area is in data and AI, which is probably what excites me most at the moment, specifically around ML ops and how we're starting to apply all that rigor and quality that we always bring to software engineering into the space of data science and machine learning.
Awesome. Gwen.
Hi, so I'm Gwen. I'm an engineering manager at Sonocent, as I said. So I'm an organizer of the Leeds Testing Atelier, which is a free one-day conference that usually happens, but it hasn't happened this year. Hopefully it will happen 1 year in the future. And yeah, I'm a strong believer in making the tech scene as welcoming and punk as possible. And yeah, so what am I into at the moment? So I've moved to Sonocent, which has been really exciting. I'm doing some front-end development at the moment, which I'm not great at, but I'm really, really enjoying it. So I was an engineering manager for like a year before that, and I didn't get to code anymore. And yeah, I just like messing with things. I absolutely adore automation. Yeah, so anything automation wise makes me pretty happy, as long as it's not silly automation, but I mean, who's to say what is? Anyway, so yeah, that's me.
Cool. I'll stay with you for the first question, if that's cool. Do you think that full stack engineers should have the choice of what cloud technologies they should be using? What's your approach at Sonocent, or maybe one of the other places?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. We all agree as a team at Sonocent. So we've got 2 cloud stacks. Like we've got Google Cloud and AWS, and we do have a say whether we can move between them. Yeah. And also we're having a look at Netlify at the moment, and we might be moving some stuff onto that. I think definitely, we get to work with the systems. We should be able to have an opinion about how we deploy those systems and where they live as well. So I think it's been really valuable for us having the choice and being able to investigate different options. And yeah, just means that you're more bought into the solution, and the whole you build it, you run it, you're more likely to run it if you've helped in choosing the solution.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never thought of it like that. We used to get complaints by some of our engineers that were like, you're telling me to build it and run it, then that's fine, but don't tell me how to build it, please. So I can totally...
That's fair, yeah.
Tanja, in Sky Betting and Gaming, I guess you've got a few more constraints to deal with. So, you know, if the same questions asked to you around, you know, should full stack engineers have the choice of what tech they use, how would that fit in maybe more of an enterprisey sort of organization?
So my philosophy is very much aligned to Gwen's, and I always believe autonomy, where possible, is the only caveat, is like what Gwen says, if you have the choice and you then believe in what you're building, because at the end you'll own it, you put more of your heart and soul into it. But yes, so I do believe in guardrails. I want to give engineers, and to be honest, engineers should have all the options. They should put everything on the table, and then everybody look at it. but we also have to look at it from the business perspective. What are we not allowed to do? What data is not allowed to go where? And that's just part of the constraint. So it makes the decision a bit more complex, but very much autonomy where possible.
Cool. Thank you. And Carl, it's also a little bit different in a consultancy where, of course, our clients' setup needs to be taken into consideration. What's your experience been?
Well, certainly, yeah, more than taken into consideration in a lot of cases. Some cases you won't really have as much of a choice, even though you're there to be a guidance and advisor. However, I'm a big fan of allowing levels of autonomy and allowing teams to choose and get involved themselves. But you do have to be aware of a number of factors, especially in enterprise organizations. There's a lot of cost involved in multi-cloud environments, for example, if you're going to run with multiple clouds. And one of my pet hates is large amounts of technologies increase the complexity of any solution. And I believe that complexity risk is the largest risk in software development, full stop, by an absolute country mile. And you have to balance the additional complexity risk you allow with the autonomy you're allowing people as well. Yeah,
that's a great point. That's really well put. I couldn't have put that better myself. And there's been a couple of questions come in around this, and so feel free to carry on asking your questions because it makes it a bit more live. What if devs and platform engineers disagree on the tooling? Who wants to chime in with that one?
So in the past, where there's been a few different options for a solution, if people are really passionate about it, I get them to demo, like build what it is and do a demo and then have everyone choose. And if it's a vote, then, you know, that's how it happens. If it's really extreme and it's like really not a good idea, then usually a lot of people won't agree with it anyway, so hopefully you'll be fine. But yeah, sometimes you will need to say like, I'm sorry, I appreciate your idea, but it's not going to work for these reasons. Like, but that's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to chime in like a panel. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Chime in away.
I think I'm not going to answer the question directly, but there's I find it that aspect, the kind of like holy war of technology choice and disagreements on technology is quite an interesting field. I actually have an interest in kind of how cognitive bias affects our ability to deliver software. And there's a part of confirmation bias called my side bias that basically means you won't ever change your view on things you really, really strongly believe in. So you'll sometimes get like monorepo versus multi-repo, or whatever your difference in opinion might be. You sometimes just have to choose one, and some people are just going to have to suck it up. It's a bit hard, but sometimes it is not possible to get people to see all of the other side.
Yeah,
I do think discussions like that are very constructive, and I do enjoy seeing the different types of engineering come together and have a good constructive and maybe even heated and passionate argument on it, because the good things come out of that. And I've had dev engineers influence platform engineering to an extent that it was company-wide impact as well. So yeah.
And can I stay with you there, Tanja, and just ask you about, because this is another question that's come in, how do you do due diligence on these technologies and kind of these discussions about it, and ultimately who does get to decide?
I mean, so how we do it is, and how I've always done it, is we tend to do impact assessments. We look at the technology, the different options, and then we come as a group together, and that's multidiscipline. So it's not just dev engineering. We have our obvious platform engineers there. We have our architects. We have the EMs. We have the testers there, and we all look at it. And most of the time, and the majority of the time, we do come to the agreement of what the best option is, and that does the due diligence. When we've hit deadlocks, we tend to, kind of back to what Gwen says, we tend to, okay, let's come back together, let's do some POCs, you do this POC, you do this POC, let's come back together until we can find a way to resolve those deadlocks. That's always been the way forward, really. It's like evidence it. if you're not sure, evidence it, because at the end it's back to the facts.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. Have any of you ever gone so far down a line with sort of saying, yeah, we'll go on that, we'll invest into it, we'll potentially build a few things out, and you've actually gone along that line, and then 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe even 6 months later realize, oh dear, we made the wrong decision. Maybe we should have chosen something else.
So yeah, I have. This was probably a lifetime ago, maybe 10 years ago, and it's not really cloud technology, but I don't want to go into too much details of which company, although if you look at my LinkedIn, you can figure out which one. And they went with a product and invested a year's worth of engineering into it. And then 2 months after it launched, they had to scrap it because it just wouldn't work. And it was, at the end, I call it a vanity project. It was one of those kind of what Gwen's story reflects, is that let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. It'll be fine. No one, it's like the king's clothes. It's like, don't tell the king he's naked. You know, just keep going. It was a good learning experience.
Cool. Thank you. So in what kind of development, deployment environment, cloud platforms have you seen software engineers quite content? Gwen, is there some environments that you found that's quite?
So AWS, AWS is huge now and it's gotten insane, but usually people are pretty happy with AWS. So I used to do a fair bit of cloud stuff quite a few years ago, and I was always stuck on Azure when everyone else had AWS. And at the time, the tooling for AWS was so much cooler than Azure, and Azure was always 6 months behind. I think it must have been like 4 years ago. And I was always very sad. And then when you finally work on AWS, it's just like, yeah, this is fine. Like, yeah, but I hear a lot of good things about Google as well. Yeah, so when I've used Netlify on personal things, I haven't used it properly outside of that. I'm pretty happy. Oh, and like, yeah, there's so many tools. Like everyone raves about Kubernetes and stuff like that as well, don't they? So, yeah.
Do you think there's always a bit of a grass is always greener kind of feeling about the platform that you're not on?
Yeah, I think it did eventually. Once I moved away from Azure, it did go away. But Azure's fine. I think it was just because it was like all the tools were so shiny, and because a lot of the conference I was going to, everyone was on AWS, and I was like, it always felt like I was the only one on Azure, even though that completely was not true. Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's just what you hear other people talking about. Like when you go to conferences, do you remember how everyone used to talk about Docker like 6 years ago? Be like, oh, well, I need to try Docker. Everyone's using it. And yeah, it's just doing what the cool kids are doing.
I didn't realize that all the cool kids were on AWS, but Tanja, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but Skybet's kind of setup on Kubernetes has been quite successful, and I've talked to a lot of folks from Sky Betting and Gaming that have really talked about how that deployment environment's been super easy for them to use. Is that something that you've found?
Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes, I moved to Sky Betting Gaming very much so because of Kubernetes. Obviously, great benefits as well, you know, by the way, we're hiring. But yes, so I moved and I wanted to work on Kubernetes. It's kind of like what Gwen says. You hear about this, ooh, Kubernetes, these people are working on it, it's magical, the new cool kids are doing it. It's like, I'm going to go and do it. And it is very, very impressive. Like this business works in an immense amount of scale. And Kubernetes has just made things so much more reliable, predictable, feel like we can actually control something. And I do believe a bit like it's like self-healing technologies, even though we're not fully there. But yes, it's been a great journey.
Amazing, good stuff. And Carl, you're kind of responsible for a very large engineering function. And within that, there sits a lot of cloud products. So what do you feel are the kind of cloud products that you feel are most suited to some of the full stack engineers in particular, maybe?
Well, so I think we've mentioned quite a lot of that already. However, I did want to pick up a point on the Kubernetes thing, and actually in relation to some engineering insights work we've been doing at BJSS. So we go around and ask our engineers for their feedback on certain technologies, and obviously container management as a whole was one of those areas. And actually, we had a really mixed feedback. So you do get some people who follow the, yes, this is the next big thing. We had an awful lot of people that said they wanted to skip it as a type of technology, or move directly to kind of serverless and avoid the need to even think about maintaining and managing Kubernetes and container management. So I think, yeah, for me, where we've seen it be a really big success, and I'm sure this is like it is at Sky, is where you have a really solid platform team implementing it and running it for you effectively, that really know it inside and out, because it's complex stuff. I talked about complexity risk before. It's really complex stuff. And if you don't really know it inside out, you're going to make all sorts of mess potentially. So I think some people have been a little bit burnt by that mess that's been made by not really knowing it inside and out.
I really agree with Carl. The one thing that came really well with our company is that we have invested in a very good platform team, and we have some of the most knowledgeable people in this technology. I couldn't imagine touching this technology with a group with no one experienced to help guide us, because like you said, the complexity, you can get really wrong.
So at Sonocent, we hired a DevOps engineer. So the developers were doing all the DevOps kind of style stuff themselves at first, and our life got so much better. The things that we were really struggling to fix for a long time, he just came in and he was like, oh, and he fixed it within a day. And it was like our deployments, like we were like, oh, we can't move to like faster deployments because we have this downtime because of the database. And he's like, you've just got it set up wrong. It's just like, winner. Yeah.
And that was with what platform? What platform was that you were struggling with that stuff on?
It was AWS and Postgres. Like, yeah, we just had something set up wrong. I can't remember the details, but yeah, it was really entertaining how quickly he fixed it and how quickly he can fix so many of our issues as well.
Because I was just going to follow up with a similar kind of sentiment of question to Carl with what he said around the complexity of Kubernetes and how it's very easy to get it wrong. But I was almost wondering if you can almost do the same mistake in AWS, which is also, there's tons of stuff that, you know, if you go set up your own VPC, for example, you've got to go into about 10 different menus, align about 10 different things, and then hope at the end of it that you've got it right. I know Terraform helps you with that a little bit, but what's your thoughts on that, Carl?
That's true of anything. You can get anything really wrong, right? Even the simplest things. It depends on the scale of which, the level of which complexity it permits or encourages. And it also depends on the general level of knowledge, both in your team and in your wider organization, available to you anywhere. Some things are easier to get very wrong than other things, and some things have bigger effects on when they get them wrong than others. I think the AWS tool set is very capable, very expansive. Because of that, it adds a lot of complexity on the different levels of choice you have and all the tweaks you can make. So yeah, I kind of see your point both ways. However, if you narrow the AWS or any other cloud vendor's environment and options down into a set of very capable serverless options, for example, and I'm just picking that for example, then you really narrow the potential risk, the complexity, and also allow people to focus their knowledge on an area which allows them to work effectively. So I don't know that answers the correct question directly, but.
Yeah, but do you feel comfortable sort of inviting full stack engineers to say, hey, come on, play about with this environment and get it working for us, knowing at the same time there's the risk that they could make the ship fall over? Like
with the right support, you wouldn't just do that and say, go on, do it in a really important environment. But well, I really believe really strongly in T-shaped people and multidisciplinary teams, and I'm sure nobody here will disagree, right? That's kind of the point of a full stack engineer, and it's that T-shapedness. So you're going to learn by doing those things. Just employ that option in the right environment with the right support, where the mistakes aren't so impactful.
Great, cool. So I want to talk about data a little bit, and how we're starting to see data systems become more and more either integrated with the software engineering that we're doing, or running side by side. How do you feel full stack engineers should be involved with data? Because I think that's another thing that some companies is like totally, the data warehouse is completely separate. Just chuck the data over the fence, they will deal with it. And then there's others like Netflix, for example. I've heard that I don't think there's many kind of data routes into the end user that don't go through some kind of data decisioning at each point. How do you feel that full stack engineers should be kind of brought into that data world, if at all?
Aimed at me, I assume, first.
You definitely are an expert in this area, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
So you're right. Data programs haven't moved at the same speed of advancement in the way we deliver them as software delivery. I think a lot of them get delivered as waterfall-y type projects, separate of business realization of value. So not actually for end use cases. I'm a believer that you should apply the multidisciplinary approach to data as well, which means that your teams should be delivering use cases and outputs, not just data platform work. So that might mean you have engineers of all type, including full stack, delivering maybe it's custom visualizations as well as the full engineering stack. But remember that data engineering is about knowledge of data as well. So maybe we're talking about full stack data engineers here. Actually, something I don't really see much of. Most data engineers really do focus on just that platform side of things. The type of full stack data engineer I guess you might get is a BI developer who's also a data engineer. That's probably the closer thing, but not proper full stack. And I think maybe actually, as you know, we're seeing lots and lots of data platforms being built and integrated into businesses, you maybe see a bit more of that.
Cool. Tanja or Gwen, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I always feel like data engineering is like quite a different discipline. So like it's a lot of different tooling. So I didn't know anything about data engineering really until I managed the team at Monzo. And yeah, it was completely different tooling that I hadn't really come across day to day. Different languages that I've never touched Python before. I didn't really know, and so yeah, there was that as well. It's doing that as well is a lot. So, there's a limit to how much you can know and how much you can be like slightly confident in. Yeah, I think adding data engineering is a lot.
I mean, for me, I think the expertise of data engineering deserves its fully own respect, because it is it is a different discipline and they have different focuses. But I do think full stack engineers should have a healthy interest in it. So
there's a comment in the chat for data engineering to use D3. I just noticed. Sometimes you're really using D3 when you're building something very custom visualization wise. A lot of people are looking to use the modern BI tools to deliver experience and visibility of data where they can. And D3 is, really does build you really powerful custom stories about the data through visualization, which can be great as long as you keep them simple. I'll go back to that again. But it's not as much used as it used to be, in all honesty.
Cool. I'm going to go back a couple of steps here because there was just something asked about serverless. And I think, Carl, you mentioned serverless a little bit. How do you ensure that serverless components are correct and mistakes aren't made? I don't know what kind of correct means in this question, but just keen to interact with the questions we've had.
Again, the same. I'm not sure what correct necessarily means. However, you can't just go and use serverless and get it right first time necessarily. You have to understand the different patterns you need to use, the different how to do it. And we have at BJSS, we're very lucky. We have a long line of very successful serverless projects that we can look back on and have a lot of shared knowledge in that space and reusable patterns that we know to apply, and making sure that we apply those, and also call on people, bring people into those projects that understand it, architects that have worked in that space, as well as call on people in the business who know it very well.
Yeah, I think the patterns, tried and tested patterns is a real big thing. I think it's very easy to, I've seen serverless projects be huge successes, and I've also seen them being used wrong at times, and again that leads to unnecessary complexity and things like that. Cool. A question from Michael Fordham. In my experience, full stack engineers sometimes lack consideration for non-functional and cost aspects of using the cloud. Is this something the panel has experienced?
So again, with the DevOps engineer that we got in, he looks at cost a lot, where when I do stuff like this, I just get stuff working. And so it has been really different seeing his point of view. And I think we've probably saved a lot of money because he's there and he's a lot more considerate about it. That might be the kind of human he is though, compared to me, which is like, all right, does it work? Okay, brilliant. Yeah.
I think an engineer that thinks that way, that doesn't consider those, is still needs to gain more experience, because at the end of the day, you can build something great that you think is great and dream big, but it needs to fit the picture of the needs, and business requirements are part of that, and you do have to keep that in mind, and cost is one of it.
And I think a good example of that, Tanja, is I had one team that had their AWS bill in Leeds, and it was something like $6 a month, and they were doing all these crazy dashboards and all sorts, absolutely milking as much power out of AWS for as little money as possible. And a very similar team I was managing in Amsterdam were kind of burning through $60,000 a month. And so there was a big difference, even though they were the same company, but different team.
Yeah, I think it's experience, and also just maybe the philosophy of the lead engineer there. So I have had experience of lead engineers who, kind of like the former team you mentioned, like to gamify and milk AWS for everything that they can get for this little cost. And they set themselves as a challenge without me even asking. They're just like, yeah, I want that. All right, okay.
Do you ever sometimes think that there's the actual development effort that they're putting in to do that ends up costing more if you look at, you know, developer day rates, which aren't cheap?
Not in this instance, actually. Did everything to what we agreed. So,
brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. This is a great example. Cool. I see many companies underinvesting in platform teams and instead promote DevOps, which is often seems to mean ask JavaScript developers to provision their own infrastructure with all the resulting mistakes you discussed earlier. Do you see it like this? And if so, why do you think it happens?
So we have a separate DevOps team and platform teams, but I do believe in what we build, we own, and that includes the pipeline. And I do feel that we do gain something when, even though like front-end engineers, back-end engineers, whatever, full stack engineers own that pipeline, know how to build it, know how to care for it. I think it's a good philosophy to have. I never see it from a cost point of view, actually. They are actually interested and they want to resolve any blockers or issues in deploying then and there without having another dependency on another individual or team. So, yeah.
So I'm always a little sad when I move to a company and everything like that is taken away from me. So all the monitoring, oh, you don't need to touch that. The platform team manages that. But like, that's what like brings me loads of joy. I want to play with that.
I agree.
Yeah. And so I much prefer it when I can work somewhere smaller where, like, you know, I can pair with someone and mess with it if I want. If it's like, nah, you're like, you know, let's teach you how to do it instead of just going wild on it. And I think as long as there's someone to pair with, then it's okay. You're not just throwing people at it. It's more like, let's teach people. Yeah.
Brilliant. So just kind of wrapping up, we're going to bring this to a close shortly, but I'd like to think about the future a little bit and where we see this going in terms of cloud technologies, cloud products, and how we will be interacting with the cloud. I think it's going to probably change. There's been some focus on serverless that we've talked about already. I think at the moment, some of the tool chains are still quite complex around serverless, but then we've got some other cool tech, like you've mentioned Netlify, Gwen, and there's others like Firebase, just so super easy to use. And we did a grad project at the BJSS on Friday, and literally within an hour or two, grads had working auth, you know, completely deployed with us kind of either logging in through our Gmail accounts or through email or whatever, but within an hour or two. And it was like, my goodness, and interacting with databases and all that sort of thing, and just talking hours, not days. So where do you think that you see this going in the future? Thoughts?
I'll start on that one then, I guess. I don't know for sure, but I've spoken to a few people at AWS in the past about their serverless stack, their tool chains, that kind of stuff. And their view was that they're trying to make everything more and more for the developer. They specifically said for the engineer. And I don't think that that's at the exclusion of platform expertise and real expertise of cloud. But there will be, I think, more and more of a push towards infrastructure that either you don't need to care about, or infrastructure that creates itself based upon your code. I think that will be I might be looking out a bit further, but I think, you know, the cloud vendors are really, really pushing towards that.
I think from my point of view, besides rapid scaling and flexibility, there will be more of an emphasis on integration and even hybrids of cloud and on-prem. I mean, there are reasons why people still would do on-prem, and also possibly cloud agnostic tools that allow companies to migrate. I do see that happen, and our limitation will be less hardware. It will be more limitations will be on our software. So it'll be how easily we can consume that data and services, and security.
Do you ever think, Tanja, that kind of vendor lock-in is almost by design as well? That cloud providers are hesitant to you know, let's have a single abstraction that works for all on purpose, or do you think they will warm to that and they use that as a selling point in the future?
I mean, personally, like, a business model of vendor lock-in has been around for ages, and you can just look at the toothbrush on that. I'm not a fan of it, but I can see why the companies do it. But I think, as like Carl mentioned, as we do this, as we build cloud technologies with a developer in mind, this is something developers will want. And I do think that they have a very strong voice. And I'd like to think that the vendors will reconsider and allow these types of migrations to happen more in the future. Well, you know, happen more easily in the future.
I'm quite sure when I was working at Sky, we were working with Microsoft to build a cross-platform. Like, that's right, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we were trying to do an active Sky pages across Azure and AWS, so that if there was any downtime in any of the AZs, then we could switch across to the other.
Yeah. And that was with Microsoft. Like, they were coming in and helping us to do it, weren't they?
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So Marcus from Microsoft was helping us from like the Leeds tech scene. He's a cool dude. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. It's really great to get some real leaders in this field onto our panels and part of this discussion. Let's carry on having these discussions because I really enjoy them. Really interested to know what other people's experiences are as well. I think there's still some chat going on in the chat where people are talking about other various aspects, such as issues of cyber attacks, floods and disasters and fires. So I think kind of multi-cloud is pretty much pushing the conversation in another direction completely. But just to know that these cloud technologies are at our fingertips, we can completely utilize them so much easier now as full stack engineers. And it's really good to kind of be in this journey and living at this time that we can enjoy that. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We will hopefully do another one of these in a couple of months. God bless and have a lovely evening.
Thanks very much for the invite.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.